I put out a depth chart yesterday. Somebody within the Auburn football program said, no, these things aren't right.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. And I want to wish everyone a very happy Charlie Tuesday. We're joined by Auburn message board legend, also the host of the Top Button Podcast, the Charlie5. But it's a special Charlie Tuesday because spring practice, it's back. It'll be boring, but man, we'll get some clips of our favorite people running around on Auburn's practice facility, which will be great, which will be fun. And we'll have a lot to discuss on tomorrow's show because of that. But Charlie5, yesterday on my website, auburndaily.com, I put out a pre-spring prediction depth chart. Pretty routine stuff.
Yep.
And I think I was pretty safe with a lot of the predictions that I put out there. I don't think it was anything crazy. And I added the caveat of, hey, this is how I think spring will start. I'm not predicting how it'll end and all that. Had somebody within the program reach out and say, hey, these are the things that you missed on. So let's start with the defensive line. And I'm going to incorporate Jack, linebacker, in this as well. So the four guys that we're assuming will start there. And they didn't say a whole lot. The starting group I said was Jalen McLeod at Jack, Jason Jones at nose, defensive tackle Gage Keys, and then defensive end Keldrick Falk. They added that there is an or with Gage Keys and Zacchaeus Walker at the starting defensive tackle spot. So Zacchaeus Walker, a guy who stuck around. You and I have talked about him as possibly being a potential transfer candidate several times, it feels like. He keeps sticking around, which is great. Maybe he is now in a situation to get an opportunity to be a starter or a key piece of this rotation.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to look at this on the positive aspect and not that, maybe Gage is not who we thought he was. Maybe we'll just say Zacchaeus is getting better and he's been here and he's getting that been here multiple years and he's finally getting that chance to shine. I think it is interesting that it's listed as an or. I mean, dude's been here he seems like he's been here forever. He was recruited under Gus. And but
it's crazy.
Yeah, crazy to think. But hey, you gotta have bodies there. You gotta have bodies there. So I like it that those two are kind of neck and neck, starting off with a bang right off the bat.
Yeah, and I think the defensive line rotation is the toughest to predict. I think there's a lot of variables in the receiver room. There's a lot of variables in the defensive back room, but I think there's the most with the defensive line. He tore apart. The source that called me tore apart the second group. So I put the next group in. Is that funny?
No, I love
funny.
That's
that he just wrecked me. He's like, now your next group was bad. And so I put Jamonta Waller at Jack, Trill Carter as the backup nose, Malik Blockton as the backup defensive tackle, and TJ Lindsey as the backup defensive end. And they said the backup defensive end right now is Amaris Williams, which we've talked about that being and I knew it was going to be a freshman. I just didn't know which one to put there. So I put TJ Lindsey, but it sounds like it's Amaris Williams. And then they said Brenton Williams is the backup Jack. And I don't know if I've said his name once this offseason.
I've actually forgot his name multiple times. Like I know there's that kid from Opelika, and for whatever reason, his name escapes me. If you go into like a red shirt and your name doesn't get called out very much, it's hard to remember it all. But like I honestly, I've forgotten his name multiple times. So that's good to see him. I wonder if that's actually by default because he's the only other Jack that was already on the roster. But heck, you got Amaris listed as the backup defensive end. So Amaris, you're right. My bad. Amaris is listed as the backup defensive end. So it's clearly not a freshman. Like they keep freshmen out. They'll throw him in the throw him in the rotation. So that's big. I liked Brenton when we signed him, number one, because he was local, but also because physically I felt like he was pretty close to already being there. Yeah. So I got to go back and check out that height weight chart that got released. Again, you know how I like a height weight chart, and check out Brenton Williams and see where he's at now.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he can get into hulking super teen category. If you had to guess right now, and I hate this because I really don't know a whole lot about the kid, but I just have a hard time buying that Jamonta Waller won't be the backup Jack unless you go out and get other transfers after spring, which I do think will happen. But I would be surprised if at the start of the season that's the way it was.
Dude, I'm right there with you. The only thing, maybe because he's a shorter guy, I don't know. Do you have to really hone in technique to be able to get him on?
Maybe, sure.
He's just so explosive. Like his initial burst is incredible. He doesn't boast a huge 40 time, but I bet his, whatever.
Who cares?
I bet his 10-second splits are phenomenal or whatever it is, or 10-yard splits, because he absolutely explodes off the ball and just makes plays. So I'm with you. It's going to be tough to keep him off the field. Yeah.
I mean, that's really the only position group where I feel like we're not better than a year ago. Every other group, I'm like, I can make the case of Auburn being better than a year ago. And that's why the pass rush is such a big thing. Like your top two was Elijah McAllister and Jalen McLeod. And right now it's Jalen McLeod and I guess Brendan Williams, according to this guy. So it's like, that to me is not the same thing. So I just think they're going to have to add guys. But
sure.
So they didn't comment on Trill Carter being backup nose and then Malik Blockton being the backup 3 technique. So I'm assuming those are correct going into spring, but a bunch of freshmen and then 2 new guys as far as like the transfer portal goes. So, I mean, you're looking at Jalen McLeod, Jason Jones, and Keldrick Falk being, the returning guys. Zakevious Walker, I guess, even though he didn't really play that much. And then everybody else is new. Gage Keys, Jamonta Waller, Brendan Williams, I already forgot his name again, and Malik Blockton, TJ Lindsey. It's a brand new room. And I think there's going to be some good and some bad with all of that.
Yeah, I like having young guys play, but at the same time, you got to expect there's going to be some growing pains. But the good news is if you can get them in early and get them in playing, you could have a 2 to 3 to even maybe a 4-year stretch of just you're not completely seeing a whole bunch of new faces. You're having established guys in an established rotation out of the high school ranks instead of having to pick and prod to try to find guys to fit some holes that we have. Hopefully this big class we just had, you can stack it up. You've already got a big 2025 class already committed. You got to sign them, and maybe you can add a couple more to that. So it's a new room. It is a questionable room, but I love the direction it's heading in.
Yeah. Won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but in my article at auburndaily.com, I just listed the top 4 running backs in order: Jarquez Hunter, Damari Austin, Jeremiah Cobb, Brian Batty. And they said internally it's Jarquez Hunter, then everybody after that is an or.
Yeah.
So,
I can see it.
Which seems right. I mean, you got 3 different dudes behind Jarquez that all do different things. They're all valuable to the roster in different ways. So that makes sense, but you got to have a pecking order for the sake of conversation there.
Sure.
So, I put Hank Brown as the number 2 quarterback.
Yeah.
And while I was being ripped apart, that didn't come up. So I asked him, what do you think about me putting Hank at QB2? I'll tell you what they said in just a moment, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Charlie5. Charlie5.
I cannot imagine.
Can you imagine placing a wager anywhere other than FanDuel?
It's impossible for me to imagine that. It's just absurd.
If you feel good about this upcoming season, it's like the line is 7.5 for Auburn wins in 2024. And it's like, can you imagine taking that confidence somewhere else? The answer is no. No, because you want to go to FanDuel because you're like, the app is easy to use. Sure, I can bet on Auburn stuff, but there's a million other things I can wager on, unique prop bets. They got a parlay hub. I mean, there's so much to love about FanDuel. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shots. FanDuel's the official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. Charlie5, apparently, Peyton Thorne is QB1 entering spring.
Sure.
After that, After that, it is Holden Geriner or Hank Brown, is what I was told.
Interesting.
Especially in a situation where, like, usually when, and this goes back to the jack linebacker spot with Brenton Williams, like usually, like default, if it's close, the older guy is first in the pecking order. So the fact that there is an or between Hank Brown and Holden Geriner, I think says way more about Hank's chances than it does about Holden's chances.
I say it's interesting. It's really, honestly, if you've been paying attention at all, it's not very surprising, especially after Hank's performance in the bowl game, what Holden was able to do. And even though it was limited opportunities, the seemingly, struggling to have some, success in those opportunities, it's not surprising that that's an or right now. I mean, I think Holden's fighting for his life as an Auburn Tiger this summer, and he's going up against a guy.
That sounds dramatic, but I think you're right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm serious. So that's a very interesting distinguish. To me, that says a ton that it's an or and not a 2 and 3. I mean, I think it's a battle right there for who stays and who goes.
I think the locker room is ready to see Hank Brown. I think the locker room is there, and that shouldn't matter 100%, but at quarterback, it's usually pretty telling because everybody knows how important the quarterback is. It's obviously the emotional and physical leader, and then you can only do so much unless you have really good quarterback play.
Do you mean Hank? They're pulling for him to be the starter or the all out number 2 guy? Like,
I don't know, but it does seem like they're for him. Like it seems like they like Hank Brown a lot. I think he's gained favor and respect in the locker room for what he did on scout team a year ago. And then obviously the way he conducted himself in the bowl game. I mean, these older guys paid attention to that. Everyone I've talked to is like, Hank's impressed me, man. And then they add the caveat all offseason, like, and he was doing this on scout team. Every like guy that I talked to is like, well, that's great. That's awesome. And so the pecking order and like the order in which they go through drills, I expected to go Peyton, Holden, Hank, Walker. But by the end of it, I bet it goes Peyton, Hank, Walker, Holden. That is my prediction by the end of spring.
I think it's a pretty safe prediction. Because I wouldn't be shocked if some of the guys have already let the coaches know, like, hey, this is sort of it. Like we're going to give it a shot, and whatever happens, I'll be looking elsewhere if it doesn't shake out. So it wouldn't shock me if you don't get an idea pretty quick that it's one or the other is not gonna make it, and you start to see their reps go elsewhere.
Switching to the defensive side of the ball, I put the starting nickel to be Caleb Wooden, and then the backup nickel was Champ Anthony. And I asked about that, and they said that it's kind of interesting because the defense is going to be different, and so we don't really know yet. Oh, okay. All right. So I am curious because we talked about this before, like with we went from Steele to who was Harson's first DC. I am blanking. Derek Mason, right?
Derek Mason.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And they changed like what they wanted in that nickel. Like some defensive coordinators want like a third safety. Some defensive coordinators want like a third nickel. And so I am kind of curious to see how they handle all that.
Yeah, I'm like you. I don't know enough about.
I think I said third nickel instead of third corner. My bad. Third safety versus third corner is what I meant to say for the nickel position.
We know what you meant. They're going to light you up in the comments, but we know what you meant.
Light me up, baby. Give me the engagement.
I'm like you though. I don't know enough about the system per se to know what Durkin's going to, because it could like his what he wants could change by looking at the personnel and how he feels like he can maximize productivity on the field. So that nickel position, that pecking order could be pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think so, because so many of these DBs, and I don't think this is just an Auburn thing. I think it's the way defenses and college football has evolved. But so many of these DBs can do multiple things. They either can play outside corner, or inside corner, or they can play inside corner / nickel and also play safety. So, I mean, if you told me by the end of it, like Keontae Scott's obviously a huge part of this because he's going to start either at corner or at nickel, whatever they decide to do with him. But like, if you told me like Terrence Love, like, do they see Terrence Love as a safety or a nickel? Like that's interesting to me. Is Champ Anthony a nickel or an outside corner? Like, a lot of these guys can play different spots. Laquan Robinson, I mean, we don't really know anything about him. He looks like a safety. Like, boy, does he look like a safety. But, could you put him other places if you feel good about Sylvester Smith and Jaron Thompson, the transfer from Texas, and you just want all three of those guys on the field for whatever reason?
Hey, Terrence Love, by the way.
Yeah.
220 safety. Look out. Look out for that one.
And can move.
Yeah. So you're talking freaky athletic and big. You're talking linebacker size. What if that's the type of nickel you want to go with? A guy that can essentially be another linebacker on the field, but can run and cover, like
especially on early downs too. Delicious. You know how I feel about Terrence Love?
You love him?
I love him.
You telegraphed that one.
Oh man, yeah, came out of nowhere. Yeah, so I have my starting DBs going into spring for Auburn: Keontae Scott and Kayan Lee at outside corner, Jaron Thompson, Sylvester Smith as starting safeties, and then Caleb Wooden as starting nickel. Is that what you would do, or would you change that up?
Is that what I would predict, or is that what I would do?
Predict.
Yeah. I mean, starting off, I think you're right. I think Keontae Scott starting off is going to go outside because that's what he said he wanted to do, and that's what they kind of envision him doing. But eventually, I think he's going to be back at. I think eventually he'll probably be back at nickel, and you'll have.
Okay, so let's go through that then. If he goes, let's now predict our end of spring. Starters. So you've got Kayan Lee still at corner, then Keontae Scott at nickel.
Yep.
Okay. Who's the other corner that steps up?
Antonio Kite.
Antonio Kite beats out JD Rim. That's what you're predicting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then your two safeties would be
probably Jaron Thompson's one. And then honestly, it could be a number of guys for the other. I don't even, there's so many. I'm honestly afraid we have too many guys, too many talented guys for one spot. So the homer thought is just going to be Laquan Robinson, but what if it's Sylvester Smith, or what if it's Terrence Love? Like, it depends on again what kind of.
Hey, do you know how I feel about Terrence Love?
You love him?
I love him.
I don't hate him. I love him as well.
That's going to get old quick. I can't wait for that to get old quick over spring. No question about it.
Big
all right.
1 weekend, 2 practices in.
That's right. So I had an interesting conversation with somebody, maybe a hater, maybe just a pessimist. I don't know, but I want to run it by you if you don't mind. If you don't mind, that's coming up right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show is brought to you. Charlie5. Can you imagine buying tickets anywhere other than Game Time?
I not only can't, I won't imagine.
If the only way I can go to an event is to buy a ticket elsewhere, I'm not going.
I'll sit right at home. I'll sit my happy butt at home.
It's such a miserable experience buying tickets elsewhere. But then Game Time comes, this free app. You can see the view from your seat. They also have this Game Time guarantee where they will guarantee you that their ticket prices are better than everybody else's. I love that we love Terrence Love. Game Time loves us, and Game Time loves you as well. Download the free Game Time app today. Make an account. Use code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, Locked On, for $20 off your first purchase. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Charlie5, I'm not going to say arguing because I didn't have it in me to argue. But I was having a conversation with somebody that eventually turned into very one-sided, and I guess I was just listening, about how the roster's not that much better than a year ago. And we've lost pieces, didn't really gain a whole lot of pieces. And I'm like, I don't really understand where you're coming from with this, because your quarterback room, you have a returning starter now. I know you had that a little bit of a year ago, but I just don't really think the system and all that really worked out with it. All your running backs are coming back. Your offensive line seems significantly better than a year ago. Ironically, since losing your best offensive lineman, but everything just seems to make sense. And you've got a lot of returning guys in the system, which I really think we're undervaluing among the Auburn fan base. The receiver talent is going to be night and day difference. Hopefully that turns into execution and production. But all of these conversations that we've had, you and I, as well as other people have come on the show, there are so many position groups now where we're having a hard time making the case of some guys over others. And it's not this time a year ago, we were saying, I hope somebody steps up in the wide receiver room. I hope somebody steps up at linebacker. I hope somebody steps up at position blank. And now when you talk about the linebacker room or the receivers or the defensive backs, like you were just saying, if somebody doesn't step up, you lose your job.
Yeah.
And somebody else takes it, because there's too many options now for somebody not to step up. And it's just this is what competition looks like. And we're seeing a better version of, man, there's a lot of guys that could take these spots. And even some of the more proven guys that we feel so good about, like Eugene Asante. It's like, well, what happens with DeMarcus Riddick or DJ Barber? Because I think some of these guys are so good that they're going to make this decision a little bit tough for this coaching staff. And I just wanted to vent for a little bit on that, if that was okay.
I'm with you. I look at it like this. The only real position where I see a genuine question mark, like I don't know what you're going to get out of that position, is the defensive line position opposite of Jason Jones. The guy that's going to be playing by Jason Jones. Like, who is that, and how talented are the oars there? You got two oars. Like what top end level talent are they? Like, we don't 100% know. Zacchaeus Walker's been unhealthy. Gage Keys didn't have a ton of production early at Kansas this past year. Kind of started to play a little bit better towards the end of the year. So how does he translate to the SEC? That's really the only one I can think about. What's another one? Can you think of another one where it's like, I don't really know if we have the talent?
No, and it's kind of wild that we can't say that. We're not saying that about defensive back, because that's like the whole Senior Bowl roster was Auburn DBs a few weeks ago in Mobile.
Right.
And I think that's a testament. And also how huge that addition for Antonio Kite was, because now you either have depth, really solid depth, or a really solid starter there. But yeah, there's not another position group where you kind of say, oh, I hope somebody does step up, because it's just a given that a certain amount of guys are going to step up in the wide receiver room. Like, you could twist and contort that into an argument for what you're asking for there if you really wanted to, but I think you'd be reaching a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously projecting that we hit on all these guys. Like, we're projecting that Cam Coleman is going to be a top 5 level player in the class, receiver, and then that immediately translate game one. So we're projecting there, and then the same thing with Perry Thompson having to come in summer, and then Bryce Kane, obviously. Like, we're assuming these guys, all their games are going to translate. I think they're pretty solid assumptions based off their record and then what early workouts and what coaches are saying. But probably that's your biggest reach is, like you said, it is the wide receiver.
Yeah. Well, and I think Auburn fans are going to realize what kind of impact the wide receiver one can have in a passing offense. And obviously, I think Cam Coleman's numbers are going to be fine. I don't think they're going to be great, but I think they're going to be fine. But Auburn, over the last decade, when the passing game has really struggled, they've had a bunch of wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3s. Like, Darius Slayton would have been a great wide receiver 2 in an SEC offense. He's just not a wide receiver 1. And now Auburn has that. And so, I've been thinking about this because I'm starting to get more and more into Robert Lewis, the transfer from Georgia State. Because another difference between him and the grad transfer receivers a year ago was, okay, 1, production, but 2, we're not asking Robert Lewis to be wide receiver 1. I think down deep, we were kind of hoping Nick Mardner or Shane Hooks or Jair Shorter were work out and pop and be wide receiver one. That's why we were talking about Shane Hooks going into the season, and we whiffed on that one. That's a bummer. But I think the expectation and the roles for these guys, they all kind of go down one spot as far as who they're going to have to beat on the opposing side of the defense. Also, what kind of level of contribution they'll have to have within the offense, because you have a guy like Cam Coleman and you have a guy like Perry Thompson, assuming he's able to pick it up quickly over the course of summer and fall. And that is huge. And I don't think we've talked about that enough this offseason.
No, I think either you or I, we've said it for a long time, especially the entire season last season. It seemed like we had a whole wide receiver room of number 2 guys. You know what I mean? Like, you're totally right. What is the value?
We asked Shedrick Jackson to be a wide receiver one.
What is the true value of having a go-to guy? Like, what does that do for the rest of the room of having a go-to guy?
Right.
Can Cam Coleman be that go-to guy? I personally think he's already going to be at like sophomore level for an average wide receiver. Like, he's going to be way ahead of the game. But what does that do for everybody else when you actually have a go-to, and your go-to is not a tight end that's lining up as a wide receiver? Like, it's a guy on the outside that can beat can beat you anytime you want to throw him the ball. He's got a higher than 50% chance of beating you. What does that do for the rest of everybody else? That's what I'm very intrigued about that. And I think people are sleeping on Robert Lewis too, because the difference between Robert Lewis and the wide receivers you brought in last year, you brought in guys, you were just trying to add bodies. You had a relationship with Nick Mardner. You thought, hey, let's take a flyer on a 6'6" guy. You go into the spring portal and you just grab guys like Shane Hooks that Deion didn't even take with him. Deion didn't even take with him to Colorado. And then Jair Shorter, who's like, if he hits, great. He's had injury issues, and then he gets to Auburn, he has the same injury issues.
Yeah, I still think taking all these guys was the right move, by the way.
Had to be.
It just didn't work out. There were lottery tickets, and you lost. I think Robert Lewis, his ceiling may not be as high, but his floor is significantly higher.
He's a guy you evaled on the front end, though. He was a guy that you pinpointed that you wanted. You scouted him, whatever, and then you got him on the first when the first portal opened. You got him in here, and you got him signed, and I think that's a huge difference.
Charlie5, how can people check out everything that you've got going on?
Absolutely. Find me on Twitter, _Charlie_5 in the Locked On Discord.
I didn't mean to click that.
Every single day, or Tuesdays and Thursdays on the Top Button Podcast.
I didn't mean to click. You can please like the video, please subscribe, and we'll be back tomorrow with spring practice reaction. This has been Locked On Auburn.